Hello again everyone, Mary Rose here at Stitch Bliss Corner, and today I'm going to be doing a video about Edgar Degas. Now, my last video about artists was when I did the Impressionists, and Degas has been put into that group, but he wasn't keen on being called an Impressionist. He didn't see himself as one. And he tended to separate himself from the group by his work and by his personality and the way he viewed art. The Impressionists were very much against the realist artists and they rebelled against that. Whereas Degas saw himself as a realist artist. He saw himself as someone who admired the masters of art, who spent hours, it's not the word, copying isn't the word, trying to replicate their work is more than copying. He was very keen on line and detail and everything, whereas the Impressionists were not that way inclined at all. They liked to splash the paint on and all the rest of it, which I covered in my last video if anyone wants to know more about Impressionism. Anyway, so to get on, here is a picture of Degas, and he looks quite deep, doesn't he there? Look at those eyes, very deep and profound and sad eyes, really, as though he's had more than his fair share of sorrow, even at that fairly young age, by the look at this portrait here. And he's got his hat there, his silk hat, and you can see that he's well-to-do. He's from a well-to-do family. But I think the way he's got his hat there, it sort of suggests there's a side of him of dry humour. He had a very dry wit, and I think a lot of his friends, one of the reasons why they stayed his friends, despite him being quite obtuse at times, is because every now and again he'd probably say one of those little dry wit gems that they laugh about and think, oh yes, that's the real boy there. Anyway, so that's just a portrait of him. Now, I'll just give you a few details about him here. Now, his full name was Edgar Hilaire Germain Degas, and he was born on the 19th of July 1834, 2 years after Manet. And as it happened, he and Manet were great friends. You might say they were like sparring partners a lot as well, because Manet used to be quite disparaging of the fact that Degas didn't show a great deal of interest in women, you know, as far as wooing them and all that sort of thing. Whereas Manet was a great ladies' man. He loved women. I don't know if he actually dabbled too much, because he was married and everything, but who knows. It was a man's world after all. Now, he was a very private individual. His mother was Creole, and she was born in New Orleans. And so I think Degas, he had this, probably he didn't feel fully French in some ways, even though his mother was from a French background and everything. Because she was born elsewhere, he may have felt just a little bit not like the others, as you might say, which might have contributed to his separation from the rest. And his mother died when he was 14. So I think, you know, that must have been very, very hard, especially for a boy, turning adolescent and everything. and maybe one of the reasons why he stayed single all his life. And who knows, maybe it was the pain of losing his mother at such a young age that may have made him a little bit wary of going through that pain again. But who knows? I mean, people do things for different reasons, don't they? Now, he had two brothers, and they joined the cotton business. And now Degas kept in touch with his family in America because he grew up in France. He went over to New Orleans for about 5 months later in, when he was a young man. But he spent all his time in France otherwise, and he basically said he was glad to be home, once he did get back to France. He tended to be someone that liked his everyday routine, generally speaking. He did spend some time in Italy as well, but I'll get to that shortly. Now, what else have I got here? Yes, he painted a picture of his uncle and his brothers when he visited there, and I'll show you that later. His father was a banker, and after the death of Degas' mother, Degas' father became quite withdrawn. He still kept the business going, was banker and all that sort of thing, his business life. But that probably had a mark on Degas as well, because in a sense, I suppose he lost some of his father as well, if he sort of withdrew a bit. Let's see now. He loved to paint movement, yes. Degas was very interested in the movement of the human body, and he started out studying quite a bit of movement in horses. He liked to go down to the racetrack and, watch them exercising and all that sort of thing. Yes, his father had some wealthy friends, and that's where Degas spent many happy hours sketching and the horses. Quite often, what he would do, unlike impressionists who like to paint out of doors and slap it all down on the canvas, Degas used to like to take very detailed drawings, like the old masters used to, and go back to the studio and do his work there. And that's one of the reasons why he said he wasn't like the impressionists. Let's see, he was 27 at that age when he was so interested in the horses. Let's see, I'm just going on here. Now, he was fascinated by men and women who frequented cafes in Paris and had friends pose for him for his paintings. Just as he was attracted to the fine lines of race horses, so he was attracted to the ladies of ballet and their athletic forms. But Degas, he used to go to the ballet, but he was most interested in what you might call the blood, sweat and tears that went on backstage. And that's where he did most of his work was backstage. And he was there so often that the ballerinas and others behind the scenes probably scarcely knew he was there. I mean, he looks, by his picture, he looks as though he could sort of fade into the background quite easily. And so he just became a familiar fixture back there. And he was able, because of that, to capture them, women in all different poses and different attitudes that the other painters of the times used to pose their people. But he was able to make many drawings and then go back to the studio and paint and reproduce these moments of people not realizing they were being watched, kind of thing. Anyway, he was able to place himself at rehearsals and classes, and he drew older dancers who had become teachers. The poor young girls, they were called rats, and these were girls from the so-called lower classes that were chosen to become dancers. And they were called rats. and they used to be placed in the back lines of the chorus. He had a very good memory and could remember fine detail from rough sketches when he returned to his studio. Now he came to the idea of contemporary art when he had formed his friendship with Manet. He started to look at things a bit differently. I'll have some pictures shortly of how Degas started out and who he took his inspiration from, what artists, and then we can go on from there, because I'll get to the pictures soon. Manet said cutting remarks about Degas, his lack of interest in women. Degas said that Manet was ambitious to court publicity, especially with the nude in the park piece, which was what I covered in the last video, where there's a naked courtesan sitting in a park with fully clothed men that caused an absolute sensation at the time that Manet rendered. Anyway, they had a mercurial relationship. Let's see. The Impressionist painters were impressed by Degas' wit and his strong views about painting styles. His presentations to the Salon between 1865 and 1870. Now, as I said in the last video, the Salon was the huge art gallery that all the aspiring artists and successful artists displayed all their work in the hopes that they would get a following and would be able to sell their paintings. Now, his presentations to the Salon between 1865 and 1870 gave him his only chance of public exposure, but the works he exhibited got mixed reviews. Now, the breakaway exhibitions, that's what the Impressionists put forward, were the best venues to show his works rather than the Salon. His two sisters married, and his brother headed off to New Orleans with his new bride. Because his father was wealthy, Degas had no problem with pressure to alter his style to sell his work, so he could pursue his style as he wanted. And Manet was the same. He could do the same thing. At the end of 1870, he began to promote himself and his work to gain more exposure. He was approached by an English art dealer, Arthur Stevens, and there were independent exhibitions held all over the UK, and Degas' paintings were in those, and he had mixed success. But he was mostly successful in America. They seemed to take to his style. Let's see what I've got here. Degas was driven every day by his work. He was extremely private about his life, and information about it is limited to a few letters. Now, supposedly he was rejected by a very young woman, when he was young. You know, maybe he must have asked her to marry him. Who knows? And he was rejected, so that put a tin cap on that for the rest of the duration. Well, I suppose in his eyes he did try. I mean, it wasn't his fault she knocked him back. Let's see. Right, I'm just going through, because if you're looking at the pictures and you know something about him, it'll mean more to you anyway. Now, then he did join up the National Guard in 1870 with Manet, and because of his poor eyesight, he ended up, I don't know if they joined him up and then realised his eyesight wasn't great, but he wasn't in there for very long. Now, his father wanted him to be a lawyer, and he went there for a couple of years and gave it up, and his father indulged him in his art. He was often seen at the theatre. Let's see. Most of his paintings, you get the feeling that you're in an audience looking at them. It's not so much that you feel like you're in the sort of he creates a kind of a distance in his pictures. In the mornings he had a routine. He painted in the mornings and afternoons, and in the evenings he would go to the cafes and the theatre. His brother invited him to New Orleans, which fascinated him, but he was not inclined to paint any of the subjects that interested him there. He just wanted to get back to Paris and the things he knew, the predictable things that probably gave him the most comfort. He said, "All I want now is to see my little corner of the world and burrow there diligently." Well, who couldn't relate to that? I certainly can. The exception was Portrait in an Office, and I'll show you that, or the cotton market in New Orleans, his uncle's business. Now, he stayed close to his father all his life, and he died in 1874. And when his father died, it turned out that Degas inherited his father's collections and things. And then one of Degas' brothers became bankrupt, and Degas sold a lot of his inheritance to bail his brother out. And after that he had to be a little bit more careful about his money. But then, not too long later, Degas' paintings began to sell, and he did quite well with his works. So he was able to afford a 3-story apartment. Apparently it was vast. And Degas was buying all the masters, that, you know, the artworks he could find too. So he had quite a collection when he died. Let's see what else we got here. Oh no, he did experiment with pastels and began using very bright colours, and they said that that could be because his eyes were deteriorating. From the age of 40 he started to have trouble with his sight, which must have been agonising for an artist to go through something like that. And he would take the pastel and boil it up overnight and use it like paint. But when it dried, it became like pastel again, creating an underpainting. And then he could retouch it as he pleased. His use of pastels was experimental, and he was able to replicate the fine fabrics of the ballet dancers' dresses this way. He became the painter of dancers and used a wide range of techniques. His observations were sharp and uncompromising. They showed so many facets. Degas identified with the dancers as he had spent years of toil to perfect his paintings, just as they spent years learning their steps. He became close friends with many of the women and girls. They regarded him as an amiable but slightly eccentric gentleman. In the course of the 1800s, his journey in life had its ups and downs. Let's see. And then he started losing his friends, like in 1883 Manet died, which hit him very hard, because he probably held just a few close friends to him that understood him. You know, when you're a loner like that, and when you have difficulty, I mean, I don't know if he did that on purpose, that he was a bit of a loner, because you know, I mean, you can lose half a day being pleasant to someone, you know, and if you're driven in your work, it's probably easier to look a bit crotchety and everything. I think Cézanne used to do that. He used to sort of be quite acid with people, probably because he just wanted to be left alone to do his work, because, I mean, they didn't have electric lights or anything, so it's not as though, you know, they could paint well into the evening or whatever. I mean, and the Impressionists painted where the light was, so they really didn't have a lot of time to be sharing the time of day with people. And anyway, let's carry on here. Now, he became under increasing criticism from the Impressionists with his exhibition, you know, the exhibitions the Impressionists had separate to the Salon, because he tended to put some of his friends' work in as well. So probably to make his work look a little bit more Well, I don't know why he did it. He must have had his reasons. Degas painted his Jews in 1882, but presented nothing. That was probably because he was a bit annoyed. In the last Impressionist exhibition in 1886, he hung 10 canvases, but all 10 won great reviews. They were all of female nudes in various everyday activities, shown bathing, drying themselves and combing their hair, which caused more of a sensation than the Seurat pointillist painting that was put into the exhibition. That was the Sunday afternoon on, I forget the full title now, but it's fairly famous if you look up Seurat. And you look up afternoon on the island of Grand Jet, I think it is, but I don't know the French, so, but it's in tiny little pinpoints of colour, and it was this new pointillism style. I have done a video on that previously, where the eye mixes the colours. You know, they're just separate dots of different colours, but when you stand back, your eye mixes the colours all together and they appear the colour that the artist wants you to see. But anyway, relations and with his one-time contributors became more and more strained, with the exception of Pissarro, whose regard for him remained intact. Well, that's not surprising, because Pissarro was a fine fellow. Degas criticised Monet's work and described him, that's Monet, not Manet, described Monet's work and described him as more of a businessman than an artist, who turned out nothing but beautiful decorations. Degas began to focus his work more and more on women of all backgrounds, trying on hats, bathing, and alone in their rooms. His true-to-life rendition of naked women bathing or adjusting their tutus in the ballet was considered by some as cruel and intrusive on their privacy. Some maintain that Degas was a voyeur who saw women as animals, but doesn't that clash with his befriending of them? I think that's absolute nonsense myself. He seemed to have a real sensitivity to the lot of women in life, which I shall go into. His attitude to women, in my opinion, was more like if you go to see the doctor and he's looking at a part of your anatomy. He's not seeing a woman as a sexual being. He's just looking at a particular piece of anatomy and appraising it. Well, you know, that's what Degas would be doing, in my view. I think that's just the way he was. He wanted to show women as he saw them, and distances us from the sexual side. See, even in his paintings, he tended to not, what's the word I'm looking for? Idolize them. He tended to show them just as they were, you know, unphotoshopped, if you will, you know, whereas the other artists tended to, you know, make them more like some kind of object of desire, you know, and emphasize the sensuality of the female form. Degas wasn't about that. He saw them as human beings rather than as women, in a way, just as he saw the horses as animals. He was interested in the musculature of them and how they moved and everything. And in order to study that, he needed to catch these females in particular off guard, in order to capture the movement and everything, rather than pose them. As he got older, he became more and more introverted. From 1890, he saw less and less of his friends, and in 1892 he stopped attending the ballet. He would paint all day in his studio and have a simple meal prepared by a housekeeper in the evenings. He did spend the summer with his friends, and slowly all of his Impressionist friends died, and he was more and more isolated. He expanded his art collection and so on. And then in 1895 he bought a camera, and he really embraced photography, because then with the photographs that he took, he was able to catch movement even better than his drawings. So he used photographs quite a lot. Now, other artists saw photography as a threat to their trade, especially the portrait artists. But Degas embraced the whole thing because it helped him to study movement. He liked how photography caught the passing minute, and he could refer to photographs as well as sketches in the studio. He constantly reinvented himself, and he had such a lively and interested brain. You know, he's just interested in everything. He was always searching for other means of expression, to find new approaches to art and breaking new ground. He tended to jump into the wild colours when later on in life. His line work became more emphasised and economical, anticipating the work of Henri Matisse, which I intend to do about Matisse in another video sometime too. Let's see. His vision became limited and so on as he got older. So he died at the age of 83 years, which is quite an innings. And he saw them come and he saw them go for quite some time, I should imagine. Now, we'll go to, I'll just give you a quote here, I think. Edgar Degas, when they were talking about him being an impressionist, he said, "I know nothing of inspiration, spontaneity, temper. What I do is the result of a long reflection and a study of the great masters." He distinguished himself from the other impressionists. I'll put other in there because he is lumped in with them. Because they painted outside, they tried to capture the moment, not necessarily movement. They did not mix their colours, but used them side by side. Unlike Degas, who used pinks and all these, you know, he did mix his colours. And they rejected the traditional style of art, which Degas did not do. So, just having a quick look. Oh yes, he was dismissed from the National Guard because of his poor eyesight. I've got some pictures here. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else before I launch into the books and things. Part of the reasons why this is so I'm pausing is because my writing is a scrawl. And there might be some cuts in here because if I take too long, I'll just cut bits out. Right, yeah, I think that's just basically repeating. Okay, so here is the world of Delacroix, or Delacroix. I have to apologise for my pronunciations throughout this video because, unfortunately, I didn't learn French, and I just don't want to make it sound as though I think I'm, you know, pronouncing them correctly when I'm probably not. So, in his early life, Degas at first fastidiously followed the classical style of composition that was traditionally taught at art colleges. He copied the old masters, and apparently that's where he met Manet one day, because he was in the art gallery doing a new system of etching directly onto a copper plate, and got Manet's attention, and they struck up a friendship from there. Now, I'll just show you Delacroix so you can see his work. This is Napoleon posing after a long night's work. And there's his arm tucked in there that he injured. I think Nelson had an injured arm as well. He used to tuck his arm in. Here's another one. What's this one? Yes, this is Mademoiselle Rose. just so you can get a flavour of the kind of influences on Degas. Now I'm just looking, oh yes, here's Ingres, that was the other. These are black and white, but you get the idea anyway. They're all studies of anatomy and classic scenes from mythology and history, which is what the Salon was absolutely crammed with. Let's see. There's some more of Delacroix's work. Oh no, this, I've just put this in because I thought it was amusing. Now, this is a Delacroix, and it says, the Salon refused this portrait of a Parisian dandy, which would have been Delacroix's 14th entry. The shape and colour of the figure led Delacroix's assistants to nickname the painting the violin case. Look at that long neck. It's sort of it. I sort of would have thought it was more like a cello case, but never, you know. So that is a very long neck. So anyway, so that's an idea of the influences on Degas of those two artists. And he used to slavishly try to emulate them. Oh yes, and that's what I was going to show you. Here's a picture of one of his in the classic style. This is Degas. So as you can see, he was quite capable of painting like the old masters. This is The Rape of the Sabines, 1862. And that's in the Norton Simon Museum, Pasadena, apparently. So, he was capable of giving the Salon exactly what it wanted. And I'll just put this in here of the Salon in 1861, just to show you how the paintings were crammed one on top of the other, and there were thousands of paintings, all with each artist hoping that his work would be singled out and that he would get a following and a backer so that he could paint and not be on the breadline all the time. Now, here is a painting of an early work from Degas of the Ballet family. Now, there they are there. It's a family portrait, also called the Ballet family. Now, Degas went and stayed in Italy for a while, and this lady here is his auntie with her two daughters, and this is the Baron. She was married to him. Now, she's got the dark clothes on because she's in mourning for her father. And Degas actually lived with this family, so he was very understanding of the family dynamics. Anyway, it was painted in oils, and it's a portrait of his aunt, her husband, and their two daughters. Now, Degas drew and painted his aunt Laura and her husband Baron Gennaro Ballet, with the two daughters Giulia and Giovanna. Laura was Degas' father's sister and is wearing black because she is in mourning for her father. He is in the framed portrait behind her. So, just there. Laura's expression is dignified and austere. Her husband appears to be distant from the family. He is at his desk, emphasizing his connection with the world of work and business. Now, I was looking at this painting, and to me, you know, because they say, oh, this family, there's a lot going on there. You know, there's a real awkwardness between the mother and the father sitting there, and he looks quite, well, he doesn't look like a nice man, does he? But I did notice that here it looks as though the mother and the daughter here are very close. It looks as though she's leaning a hand there and sort of a little bit dependent on her daughter. That, you know, that the love is very close there. And this one here, to me, she seems to be a little bit, you know, fond of her father in a funny kind of way, and also of her mother, almost in between the two of them. I wonder if she was a bit conflicted there. But nonetheless, it's quite a moving picture in its own way. So that's that one. And that was when he was quite young, he painted that. So now I'm going to the famous artists of the past, Alice Elizabeth Chase. And we'll just have a little dip into this book, because I've got the books now. We'll just go through the pictures. Now, it says here, I was just talking about how we like to look at the racehorses. A trip to New Orleans in 1873. I've got that picture a bit further in, so I won't worry about that one for now. Racehorses and ballet dancers. Degas maintained that art is a matter of the mind, not merely of the eye. He disliked painting outdoors, saying that an artist should control light, not be its servant. The aspect of the world that interested him most was movement. From the Impressionists, he learned how to draw with quick shorthand strokes that gave the sense of motion, but he never lost his mastery of anatomy. And here, this is black and white, but here are some horses here that he painted. And that one's very good, with the gentleman sitting so erect on that horse and it prancing along. I'll just see if there's anything else here. I'll just leave that open because there's some ballerinas there. I might get back to that in a minute. Now, in the world of Manet, that's the Time Life one I've got, there's a section here on Degas, and I'm just going to go through that now and just show you some of the pictures and the stories behind them. Now, this one here, this is the one that I mentioned, the Cotton Office. And this here is his uncle, and he's having a look at the cotton there and judging. This is in New Orleans, grading the cotton, just having a look at the quality. Now he's got another brother that's leaning against the little half window there, and then his other brother is casually reading the paper there. And someone said it looks a bit like a newspaper office. And I'll see if there's, I'll show it to you again. I'll just read you this first. The painting shows the cotton brokerage business of Degas' uncle Michel Mousson in the stovepipe hat, who is examining the quality of raw cotton. Degas' brother René is reading the paper, and his other brother Achille is leaning against a window wall. So that was the only painting that Degas did of New Orleans. But I think New Orleans did leave its impression on him, even though he was only there for the 5 months or whatever it was. Now this one here, Degas' father was very keen on Pagans, P-A-G-A-N-S. He was a guitarist. And then, so Degas captured him here, singing, and that's Degas' father in the background, probably not too long before he died. And you can see the sensitivity there of his father just sitting there, another man that looks as though he's had a lot of grief in his life. The way he's sitting with his fingers like that clasped together. Right, so that's that picture there. He was playing in the family's Paris home. That's where that painting was from. And here's some of his horses that he painted. He had a passion for painting living forms. He never considered horses as creature to love. A confirmed non-athlete, Degas did not even ride. They attracted him as living machinery. Right, here's some more here. I've got all this bits and pieces tucked into the books. Now here are some pictures here of nude women. I'm trying to stop everything from going flying. Now this is Le Cub, 1886, and Degas painted a series of nude women drying themselves with towels, combing their hair and bathing. He showed women in private moments performing intimate self-care. There are some who have described Degas as a misogynist for painting women in this way. Now, I have a definition of misogyny here somewhere. Yes. Now, misogyny is a dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. So whoever has labelled Degas as a misogynist, really, I don't think they fully understand what that means. But that's my opinion, of course. There are some who have described him as for painting the women in this way, in their bath and everything. But as you can see, again, there's a kind of a barrier between us and, you know, it's sort of like, to me, it's the opposite of misogyny, because he's painting a woman not as a sexual person, but as a figure, as a person. He's not emphasizing their sensuality in any way, shape or form. And here is another one. This person, women ironing, the millinery shop. He was particularly interested in them because the milliners, they were losing their trade because, you know, more factories were making hats. So the actual individual milliner was not, you know, I suppose the high-end ones were surviving, but the other ones probably had to go and work in the factories. And this one is Woman in the Tub there. And I mean, it could be argued that some of the artists that did married because, number one, they had a subject there that they could paint and sketch any time they liked. They had someone to clean their house or studio or wherever the little room they had, to cook for them and to wash their clothes. Degas never did that. I mean, if you know, he might have employed someone to wash his clothes for him, or he might have done them himself, but he didn't marry someone, so they had to do it. Right, The Absinthe Drinker, 1876, is a representation of social isolation in Paris. It depicts a woman with a blank expression, affected by alcohol, and with a drink of absinthe in front of her. Absinthe is a potent, aniseed-flavoured alcohol spirit made with shrub wormwood, because I looked it up. Next to her is an alcoholic. They were considered at the time to be representative of the lower class clumsy and degraded. The woman was seen as a whore by some. And now, what choices did women have? This is the question. Now, you could either be, I'm going to tick up this down here for another picture I'm going to show you later. A servant, a nun, a nurse, a companion to a wealthy woman, an actress or dancer, a wife, or a prostitute. And that was pretty much all you could do if you were a woman. So Degas quite often, and there's a painting that I will show you not too long into the future, that I think shows the sensitivity of Degas to the lot of women. I think he was a champion of women in many ways, in a time when men really didn't see women as anything other than a chattel. You know, he recognised the grind and the toil of women more than probably most of the artists I've looked at anyway. Anyway, whatever, I'm just getting lost here. Don't worry about me. Right, so, here's the picture of the absinthe drinker after all that. Yes, there she is with her drink in front of her. And she does have quite a blank, but she looks worn down, doesn't she? I mean, it's a blank expression, but it's one of world weariness, if anything. Probably trying to work out what to get him for tea, if that's her husband next to her. Yeah, so that's that one. And now, now here's a painting that I like in particular because, well, it's not that I like it in particular, it's just that I like the way it introduces a certain subject, put it that way. Now this one is The Orchestra of the Opera by Edgar Degas. And here's his friend here, he's a bassoonist in the orchestra pit. But just look who's in the background, the legs of all the dancers, the ballerinas. And it's been suggested that the top of them have been chopped off in order to give full focus on his friend here playing. Now what does it say here? This is the first of Degas' depictions of the opera, and has often been seen as marking the final break with his history paintings of the 1860s. The orchestra is strongly framed by the sharply picked out edge of the stage and the foreground side of the orchestra pit. Other elements, sorry, that just chopped off again, it decides it's had enough, I think. Now, is there anything else about him? I don't think so. Mary Cassatt, now she was an American impressionist and she was a friend of Degas, and she described him as having beautiful intelligence. So I think we'll listen to her. Now then, what else have we got here? The dance class. Sorry, that little break's sort of thrown me a bit. I'll just show you this one before I move on. That one is The Ironing Woman, 1869, oil on canvas, and that's currently in Munich, is where that can be seen. Okay, now the dance class. That's this beauty here. One of the most celebrated of Degas' paintings. Edgar Degas was a regular visitor to the Paris Opera House and was permitted to be present at dance classes because his friend, Jules Perrot, or Perrault, I don't know how you say that, was a ballet master. In this painting, Degas shows the various poses and movements of the dancers as the lesson approaches its conclusion. Perrault is conducting the lesson in the rehearsal room of the opera house with a baton to beat time on the floor. And there's his, where's his stick there? There. And look at how straight he is. And here are all the, you know, getting ready here, and this one performing, for, you know, because he's looking at her and just appraising her performance. And here at the back up here are some of the mothers and some of the others that used to, you know, chaperone the younger girls. Because of course there was always the presence, which I'll show you in a few other paintings, how there's the sinister figure of some of the men that used to come backstage that had less than polite intentions towards some of these young women and girls. There's more information to look up on that particular painting. I don't think I'll go too much into it because this is probably going to be long as it is. So, you know, if you're interested in that particular painting, you can certainly have a look. Now, Ballet Rehearsal. Here's another one. So I'm just, yeah, that's okay. Just checking on a few things here. It's a bit like being backstage at the video performances. Anyway, Degas Ballet Rehearsal. Now, I just wanted to show you this one. There's the ballet teacher again. But just look at this figure here. And I think Degas is just hinting there at these backstage fellows that used to probably just turn up there to go and basically perv on the girls. Because, you know, in those days, a glimpse of an ankle was something to be seen. You know, they were starting to go up, you know, in the war, the hems of women's clothes tended to go up in the First World War around that era because of all the things, you know, some were nurses and all that sort of thing, and the long dresses just got in the way, so for practical purposes. But, you know, in this particular time, women wore the long dresses. You didn't get to see an ankle much, you know, it was set men's pulses racing. So you can imagine the kind of men of great means, that used to frequent the back, you know, the areas around where these girls were. And I think it's interesting that Degas included these people, these men, in some of his paintings. I haven't seen other artists doing that. Right, what else have we got here? I think we're getting towards the... Oh, and here's some more lovely, some beautiful pictures of the girls at their work, at their craft, at the bar there, stretching their tendons and all the rest of it, flexing, ready for a performance. That drawing, and all his notes on there for when he got back to the studio. Just lovely. Now, I'm going to show you now this particular painting. Now this one, the interior it's called, and in brackets it's called The Rape. Edgar Degas, location, Philadelphia Museum of Art. Now, there's conjecture on the inspiration that Degas drew from for the subject matter here. Some say it's from a story by Émile Zola, the French writer, and others to a female literary contemporary of Degas, Kate Chopin, or Chopin, C-H-O-P-I-N, it's probably Chopin. Now she wrote about short stories and mentioned the lot of women in life. And he obviously, it struck a note with him. Now this painting, although some say it's, oh, sorry, I'm repeating myself there. Some are puzzled by this painting, but I think Degas' paintings, this is me, rather than show him as a misogynist, show him as someone who sympathised with the women and portrayed how they were at the mercy of unscrupulous men. Now, this could be a rape within a marriage. I mean, who knows? I mean, the only thing that you would say against that is that it's a single bed there. But this man here, look at the menacing figure blocking the door with that great shadow behind his head there, almost like a monster there. And even there, that almost looks like the hand of a monster standing there, that dark coat there. It's just so powerful, this image. And this poor girl here, who has just absolutely no control over what's going to happen to her. You know, she's just she is an object, a piece of furniture, just like the rest of the room. Her entire existence is based on him, on what he can or cannot do for her. I mean, that is, to me, a great portrait by Degas. It shows that he has great sensitivity towards the plight of women, as far as I'm concerned. And I'll stop banging on about that now. But don't anyone tell me he was a misogynist, or else I'll have something to say. Now then, the final part of this, I'm going to get on to a little figure that's beloved by many who love Degas' work, and that's the little dancer. Now, she was originally made in wax. Now, the original was made from pigmented beeswax, clay, metal armature, rope, paintbrushes, human hair, silk and linen ribbon, cotton fail bodice, and fail is defined as a soft, light woven fabric having a ribbed texture, originally of silk. So that was the bodice. Cotton and silk tutu, linen slippers on a wooden base. Now, so that was the original wax. Now these have all been, a certain number of them have been cast from the original, and they're throughout the world in different art galleries. And each art gallery puts its own bodice and tutu on, and the hair, in order to, you know, I think the one was done recently in New York, I think it was, where they've made the tutu a bit longer to reflect Degas' day and how the tutus were longer than this one is. So I'll just give you a little bit of history here. The sculpture is 1/3 life size, was originally sculpted in wax, somewhat unusual choice of medium for the time. The arms are taut, the legs and feet are placed in a ballet position akin to fourth position at rest, and there is tension in the pose, an image of a ballerina being put through her paces, not posing in an angelic way. Her face is contorted. People thought it was a deliberate image of ugliness, but you could also say it's the image of a sickly, gawky adolescent who is being made to do something she doesn't totally want to do. So, yeah. So that's the little dancer. And most ballerinas in their lifetime want to at least see this statue. There's another one there. I mean, people complain about the angle of the head, the way, but to me it's almost like when a baby comes out of the womb, you know, how it sort of has that flattened sort of face. I don't know, this is drawing a long bow, but it's almost like she's being reborn and moulded into a dancer from a girl, you know, to me. But that's just something that occurred to me, and probably wasn't occurring to anyone else. Let's see if there's anything else here. Yes, I've got, it says here, modelled in coloured wax. I'll have all my references below. Adorned with real hair and fabric costume, Little Dancer decisively broke with 19th century academic practice by introducing unusual mixed materials and frankly presenting a provocative modern subject. Degas added to the controversy by exhibiting it like an anthropological specimen in a glass vitrine, and I looked that up, it's a glass display case. Degas' uncannily realistic depiction of an opera rat, as young dancers with the Paris Opera Ballet were known, was a deeply unsettling challenge both to academic tradition and to French bourgeois society. It forced viewers to confront the seamy side of ballet, the cultural institution at the centre of metropolitan life. The rats, including the model for this figure, mostly came from working-class families and were popularly understood to be vulnerable to moral corruption of the hands of well-off suitors. So, see if there's anything else here for you. Degas' heirs contracted the French foundry Hebrard to cast the repaired sculptures in bronze, even while preserving the original wax figures. So there you go. Now I've got here, despite his long and fruitful association with the Impressionists, Degas preferred to be called a realist. His focus on urban subjects, artificial light and careful drawing distinguished him from other Impressionists such as Claude Monet, who worked outdoors painting directly from their subjects. A steely observer of everyday scenes, Degas tirelessly analysed positions, gestures and movements. He experimented with a variety of media, including pastels, photography and monotypes, and he used novel combinations of materials in his works on paper and canvas, and in his sculptures. Getting towards the end here. Degas was frequently criticised for depicting unattractive models from Paris working class, but others championed Degas as the one who has been able to capture the soul of modern life. At his death in 1917, he was hailed as a French national treasure. Well, he certainly was a treasure. Right, now we're just coming to my conclusion here. I'm letting Degas have the last word, but I'm just going to do a conclusion. But I wrote down, dashed it off this morning. Degas was a loner. He may have been uncomfortable at the idea of physical, intimate relationships with women. And if we're going to bandy about modern terms like misogyny, well, you could almost say that he was a, what do you call them? Yeah, that he might have had a little bit of Asperger's, you know, because they're methodical, they have difficulty in communicating with people, they have dry humour, and if you get to know them, they're absolutely fabulous people. But they turn people off a little bit. They just don't want to penetrate that outer casing. But if they did, they would find a very warm and sweet human being under there. It just takes effort. Sorry, I'm getting a bit... What's the word? I'm wandering off a bit. But in my opinion... Oh, yeah. Now, Degas was a loner. He may have been uncomfortable at the idea of physical, intimate relationships with women. But in my opinion, that does not mean he disliked or hated women and girls, or that he was some strange kind of voyeur. From what I have seen, Degas is actually someone quite sensitive to the lot of women, as shown by the interior or the rape, and the menacing dark figures lurking in the background in some of his ballet scenes. They are the misogynists, not Degas, as far as I'm concerned. His paintings of women going about their personal affairs, such as bathing and combing their hair, portray them as human beings first, and women second. Someone said that he watched women through keyholes. If he did, it was to capture them in a natural pose, not how they would be if they knew they were being observed. For his art, that is what Degas was after, not as a perv or someone who disliked women. Many of the dancers considered Degas as a friend, and he helped Mary Cassatt, who was the American Impressionist, and encouraged her as an artist. Degas' work was everything to him. He may well have developed a series of one-liner put-downs in order to be left alone to work, rather than waste half of his daytime, or daylight painting hours, engaging in polite conversation. People who liked Degas and his dry wit, but that was a problem for him as far as his work went. Oh yes, because, you know, he didn't want to put too much of that out there or else they'd encroach into his time. He did have time for the backstage rats, though, who he seemed to have an affinity for on some level, and they seemed to like him. Last words to Degas. Right, here it is. In Degas' final years, the French art dealer Ambroise Bollard saw Degas working a wax figure through 20 transformations. He then said he was about to cast it, but instead of doing that, he smashed the statuette into a ball of wax. Degas said, "You think above all of what it was worth," to the shocked Bollard. "But if you had given me a hatful of diamonds, my happiness would not have equalled that which I derived from demolishing the figure for the pleasure of starting over." So, I think there's a final, sorry, I've just noticed here there's a few that I didn't show you, but so it wasn't his final, well, maybe it was his final word, maybe this is what he wants to be his final words. Most of the Degas dance paintings focus on backstage scenes, but this is one of a lone ballerina on stage performing an arabesque. Behind her is a dark figure who suggests he is her patron and controls her like a puppet master. He looks quite sinister, a faceless man. And I think that alludes back to that, the interior painting where he's blocking the door. You see him there. So he saw it all, didn't he? He saw it all. This is a beautiful one. I think that would make a great cross stitch. It's just lovely. And then I'm just including this one here because it shows, this is towards the end of Degas' painting, 1896. And you can see the deterioration in his eyesight. You know, the darker colours you could see quite well still. But that is very Matisse-like. And when I come to cover Matisse, you'll see what I mean. Very simple. You know, it may well be that Degas did that out of necessity because his eyesight was failing. So he did sort of large areas of sort of flattish colour and everything. But it still has his mark on it, doesn't it? Okay. Well, oh, well, there's a stage mother reading the paper, or whatever she's doing. Well, they're all practicing. Or she might just be someone that does makeup or something. Who knows? Well, thank you very much for spending time with me today to cover the life and times and the work of this amazing and intriguing man. I'm so glad that I learned so much about him because he's well worth remembering and thinking about. I was going to do Toulouse-Lautrec at the same time, but as you can see, to do him justice, I had to separate them for Degas' sake because I think he deserves recognition. And so for all those cross stitchers who really like art, I hope you enjoyed this, and I shall catch you again next time here at Stitch Bliss Corner. So goodbye for now from Mary Rose.